Like I say, I'm Steve Parker. I work at M&C Saatchi as a strategy partner here. We didn't work on the 2017 campaign, but we did work on 2015 when they won, so you can draw your own conclusions from that. I'm just going to talk to you about some of the differences, I think, between those two campaigns and where potentially the Conservatives went wrong and what decisions they made and decisions they might make again. So this is just an interesting tweet. Jim Messina is a digital specialist who worked on the Obama campaigns, who works for the Conservatives. And he sort of rather triumphantly tweeted this on the day. I don't think he's tweeted anything since. But a tale of two campaigns, Tories going targeted digital and the other side flying banners. So very much the narrative leading into the result was that the Conservative Party had a really strong grip of digital campaigning and the Labour Party didn't, and that they were more advanced and were going to pay the results as well, whereas Corbyn was doing things with grime stars and flying banners everywhere and was sort of not really getting modern campaigning. I still don't think the grime stars helped him win Kensington or Canterbury, but I'm sure they had some effect. So this is the reason we went in. So as Benedict said at the beginning, in 2015, and we saw this up close when we worked with them, they had a very efficient Facebook campaign. They said, we're not interested in Twitter, that's where all the lefties are. We just want to be on Facebook. They spent 1.2 million, much more than everybody else. And they really were targeted. They understood every single constituency they went to, and they did it all internally, but had bespoke creative that went out to them. But they were very sort of efficient on this and really made it work. But the key is they understood all of the data, and everyone sort of had picked this up for this campaign. So Tories spent more than $1 million on negative Facebook adverts attacking Corbyn. Facebook is key to winning elections. There was a coming narrative that digital was going to be the most important channel once again, and the Conservatives had the best hold over it. And there was also, during this time, background noise about, I don't know if people have heard of Cambridge Analytica, but the effects that data had, and digital data together somehow was going to sort of be able to persuade lots of people to do things they didn't want to do. This was from a Guardian article. This sort of background noise that all this data together would be able to persuade us and be influenced by other people. So you had a Conservative Party with an established history for doing well with digital campaigning, a perception that they were still doing better again this year, and then the belief that this was getting more sophisticated, more easy to use to sway votes. So sort of what changed then? Why did this not work out for them? Well, I think firstly, just look at the campaign strategies between 2015 and 2017 between the two. And they were just broadly exactly the same. So in 2015, the importance of leadership was core to the campaign. Cameron was core. So Britain faces a simple and inescapable choice. Stability and strong government with me, or chaos with Ed Miliband. And similarly again in 2017, Theresa May versus Corbyn on the issue of leadership was one of the core messages they went out with right at the beginning. Again, the role of third parties was big in both campaigns as well. So in 2015, talking about the SNP, relying on Sinn Féin votes even though they don't even vote in House of Commons, or the Liberal Democrats, or even UKIP were floated. In 2017, similarly, whether it was in relation to Brexit or securing a government, this coalition of chaos message that you would have heard in 2017 was exactly the same message they used in 2015 as well. And in both campaigns, the importance of your vote was a key final part to that narrative. So they talked about 6 seats like yours being lost in 2017, swaying the election. And there were 23 seats that would decide this election that they talked about in 2015. And all 3 of those messages were targeted specifically to different constituencies based on what they thought would work best in those constituencies based on data. But the key thing is that sort of the difference between 2015 and 2017 is Labour, so Labour's behaviour. So this is 2017 numbers, just very quickly looking at Facebook. This is a very quick look at Facebook and YouTube. Facebook, they have double the number of views there. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say a view is, we don't know who's viewing these things, and I think you have to be careful when we look at digital data, because this could all be shared amongst a very small group of people who are already predisposed anyway to be voting for that party. But what's clear when you go through and you look at all of the videos on both Facebook and YouTube for both of them, because that's sort of the best indicator we have of the type of creative that was going out to these marginal constituencies. That Labour had basically taken the Conservative playbook wholesale from 2015, both in terms of the negative ads against May, but other sort of more issue-based advertising, and were using it to target people specifically in the way that the Tories were in 2015. They had reached parity for this election. So just by having this approach wasn't going to be good enough for the Conservatives. And I think that if you hark back to that Messina quote at the beginning, they believed just simply the channel itself would enable them to have an advantage, but they didn't spend enough time on the message. Similarly, and Benedict touched on this at the beginning, is the number of shares by party leader, and all the Theresa May ones, by the way, tend to be negative. But you know, the Canary and Another Angry Voice, again, the note at the beginning, big sort of new so-called alt-left publishers, and again, the Independent and the Guardian being the most successful. They're certainly not the most successful papers in print, but they are doing because the Independent isn't even in print, but online doing a good job at sort of energising that sort of more left-wing base. But the big difference, I think, was they focused on trying to be strong and stable, but the real issue that they had was they just simply weren't prepared and organised. The biggest thing that I can learn from 2015 is just how well drilled the Conservative Party were. They were a very, very tight machine. Whereas this time, calling a snap election simply doesn't give you any opportunity whatsoever to be as prepared and organised in the ways they were in 2015. And I'll talk about that a little bit from what we saw when we were sort of working with them. They had a really good idea in 2015 of what seats were in play and what weren't, and how they needed to behave. So there are three types of seats on the left that I've sort of noted. Conservative seats with a strong UKIP challenge in them were definitely seen as a really big threat to the Conservatives in 2015. Like Thurrock, Cannock Chase, South Thanet. The Conservative, you've got to forget, the UKIP got 1.2% vote in this election. They got 15.8 in certain seats outside of London in 2015. So the Conservatives did a much bigger job securing their base in 2015 because their base was a much more threat than it was this year. They knew this because they went around and they talked to everybody in these constituencies. But that UKIP threat gave them a really solid understanding of needing to bring their base out, something they didn't do this campaign at all. The second part of their strategy in 2015 was the Lib Dem decapitation strategy, which no one really understood at the time and everyone understood afterwards when they had 8 MPs. And that was huge for them. And I'll go on to talk about Linton Crosby in a minute, but they were running groups in these seats over and over again throughout the whole campaign, understanding that they could take all these Lib Dem voters. Their share of vote went up sort of only very marginally, but the Lib Dem vote collapsed in all those seats, and that was by and large because their understanding of that as a battleground. And they won all of those seats. Every seat they targeted for the Lib Dems, they won. Every seat they targeted with media. And then Labour and Conservative sort of classic two-way seats. These split even in 2015. They didn't do well, they didn't do badly. They sort of did as average because they'd won, they'd secured their base and identified a new sort of voter whose vote, in essence, they borrowed in 2015. These weren't people who were becoming Lib Dems full-time. They were sort of sway voters rather than swing voters who came across to the Conservatives. But in 2017, they completely misunderstood the types of seats that were in play, and this might be a simplification, but you sort of had conservative seats that they had historically won with large Remain votes. London seats are a good example of that, South seats. Leave Labour seats with the Tories in second. And then, I think north of the border, what no one sort of saw happening, which was the SNP held seats, which were large in votes. And the politicisation of this country in the past 2 years has been largely down to the two referendums, the one in Scotland and the one in Brexit. That has awakened everybody into this country. That is the reason we are more binary, because we have been given two binary choices in the last couple of years, and the electorate has split across those lines. Ultimately, those were the battlegrounds being fought. They weren't left and right. I think it is, are you Remain, Will you remain? Will you leave? Are you in? Are you out? North of the border? And you can kind of understand people's politics based on those two votes. I think ultimately, I don't know if it's interesting, is it elites, ordinary people thing if it's remain and leave? Kensington, I think, probably went by 20 votes because no one in Kensington wants to leave Europe, probably because they're all bankers. But those splits, those changes in the seat dynamics were really understood by the Conservatives and, in 2015 and shaped their entire campaign. And in 2017, I simply don't think they understood them as well as they did 2 years ago. And obviously, it was all down to M&C Saatchi in 2015. It wasn't. This man here, I think, was probably the second most important person. I'll come on to the first in the 2015 campaign. And they just sort of had complete control at Conservative Central Office. Him and his agency, which is Crosby, Textor, Fullbrook actually as well, they ran groups, as I said, across the country. So much so you kind of knew if they had a group there that they were going to vote there, which may be about 150 quid on Ladbrokes, because they were consistently running all of these groups across the country. And they'd been running them for 6-9 months in advance and talking to local voters. And we went to a few of them. And you could really see that by consistently doing this, you're able to be reactive to events as they happen across the campaign and shape your message along the way. I think that's ultimately what happened in 2015 that didn't happen in 2017. 2017, obviously, negative things happened, but in 2015, they were able to shift and understand what messages were working well, what issues were rising, and change their message as a result. This is the poster we did for them in 2015, which shows Ed Miliband in the pocket of Alex Salmond. And yeah, it's a very good, simple poster. But we wrote about 90 ads for the Conservatives during that time. You just keep writing them and sort of all posters. But you keep writing them, and you hopefully want. We had a UKIP version, we had an anti-Lib Dem version, we had all the message variants you could. The reason this came out is that they were polling people in groups, and they realised the SNP issue had a sudden sort of upward momentum that they hadn't seen before. So then we got that poster out on the Sunday, it was news on the Monday. Ed Miliband was forced into sort of making an announcement for it that week, and he ruled out a coalition for them. The only way that the creativity of an advertising agency can work alongside a political party is by having that ability to move that quickly. And the political posters, they didn't run any in 2017. We sent them a few, but they didn't run any. But this is a poster is still a piece of political speech from a party. That's why they still have resonance. You might think, oh, digital is important, but you say what you want about banners and Facebook posts, they're not going to sort of, Steve Bell in The Guardian isn't going to lampoon them in his cartoon the way that a poster does. It is a piece of political speech. And without having that, whether or not could we have found a message that would have cut through this year in the way that we did in 2015, it's difficult to know, but they didn't give themselves that opportunity to affect the debate the way they did in 2015, and I think it probably wouldn't have changed things dramatically, but it certainly could have changed things in order of trying to get that campaign back on track when they were losing momentum. They didn't have enough artillery to fight their way out. And also they had a positive message about the economy in 2015, kind of, if you sort of go with that for a minute. But they were able to link, good, strong public services with a strong economy. And Labour had a credibility issue on the economy, and they could neuter Labour's core message and emphasise their traditionally strongest message of the Conservative Party in a single sentence. And whether or not we sit here in this room and nod along to that, that is a vote, is a message that tested well. And enables you to sort of do 2 for 1 in terms of a positive message for you and a negative message for your opposition. And the Conservatives unable to talk about the economy is a very weakened version of the Conservatives. That's pretty much all they've got historically, that and security, in terms of how their messages can play well. Labour will outpoll them on public service provision and other measures, but they had no economic message to take to the state to the country. The idea of cuts, and that had definitely been sort of building steam, and post the election, post the referendum, I think people getting more and more fed up of them and believing that they were holding them back personally. But I think really where it comes down to is the guy on the left, and he's a very consequential politician now, probably for all the wrong reasons, but ultimately he was a strong and stable leader that people could sort of nod along to that phrase and think that sort of rang true. He'd been Prime Minister for 5 years, he'd been leader of the Labour Conservative Party for 10 years. And just throwing the same strategy at Theresa May, who people just assumed or wanted. I think there was an air of wanted her to be a leader. But that was ultimately the biggest difference. Cameron's leadership and campaigning ability, regardless of whatever advertising or channels they used, was just so much better, so much more credible to that message. And that is ultimately the biggest difference between 2015 and 2017, is not the channels they used or even the core messages, but I think the person who was delivering them. So just a quick summary that I think they completely lifted the strategy from 2015, but the fundamentals had changed. Leader not as strong, coalition not as chaotic in an obvious way, and they treated their base as a single whole. They thought a Conservative voter in the south of England was the same as one in the north, as the same as one in Scotland, and they failed to understand how their battleground seats had shifted. They had no new idea, in the same way they did in 2015, about Labour and the SNP to introduce to the electorate, and no positive story on the economy. So whilst there's a number of different factors there, I think those are the key things that why 2015 was different than 2017 for the Conservatives. Thank you.